Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the 2026 Bush Fellowship question and answer session. We will get started shortly. Again, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to get started with our 2026 Bush Fellowship question and answer session. Next slide, Jen. This is a friendly reminder that your microphone is muted. Feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. I want to reiterate that. Feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. All questions will be responded to via the Q&A function. We will not respond to questions that of raised hands throughout the Q&A session. Our application window is open until October 7th at noon Central Time, and we're glad that you're here. Before we get started, let's take a moment to introduce ourselves. Hi, my name is Adora Land, the grant-making director with a focus on the Bush Fellowship.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from around the region. And I'm Malcolm Chapman, a consultant and a 2015 Bush Fellow as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jen, Program Operations Associate, and I will be running tech today. I also want to acknowledge the ASL interpreters on the call and that we're very grateful to have them joining us today as well.
Thank you, Jen. In this question and answer session, we will share a general overview of the fellowship. We hope you've had a chance to watch our short information webinars as it provides important information regarding the fellowship and supports this live Q&A experience. For more details, please review our website and watch the short webinars after this session. For today's session, we are going to touch on a few points about the fellowship program before jumping into questions. We will do our best to answer questions about the fellowship, the application process, and hopefully further inform your decision on whether to apply. As we prepare to get started, whenever you're ready, I'd like to invite you to begin entering your questions in the Q&A function. We will try to group questions together with similar themes, so if you don't get your question answered right away, please be patient. Finally, some questions may be particular to you or require a level of detail specific to your plan and may require individual follow-up. We'll try to let you know if this is the case in our responses. With that, I'll turn it over to Malcolm to get us started.
Thanks, Adora. To apply for a Bush Fellowship, you must be at least 24 years of age at the time of application, a resident of Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, or one of the 23 native nations sharing the same geography for at least 1 year before applying. And once a fellow, always a fellow. If you are not eligible, if you've already been a Bush Fellow, a Bush Artist Fellow, a Bush Leadership Fellow, or a Bush Medical Fellow, or Enduring Vision awardee.
So why do we have the Bush Fellowship? The Bush Fellowship has been around for over 60 years. It's always been an opportunity for leaders in our region to grow their leadership capacity to do even more for their communities. And that remains central focus all these years later. Our founder, Archie Bush, believed in people and supporting their growth. He often did so in his own personal giving and then through the Bush Fellowship when the Bush Foundation was started in 1953. Since our founding, there have been over 2,500 Bush Fellows. Applications are open every year, and we continue to invest in amazing leaders each year.
As a Bush Fellow, I can remember going through the process and wondering, what are they looking for in a Bush Fellow? Well, what do we look for in a fellow? Well, there are certain attributes that we find in Bush Fellows. For example, Bush Fellows are committed to leading equitably to create large scale change. They have influence with a proven track record of making good change happen. They are sought after for help, advice, connections, and inspiration. They make mistakes, but then they learn from those mistakes. They generously share what they know with others and help them grow as leaders. And lastly, Bush Fellows are ready to take on a fellowship. They are ready at the moment as a leader and ready to dedicate the time that it would take to be a Bush Fellow. Adora.
So we make selection decisions based on three criteria: your impact as a leader, your vision for growth, and your plan for the fellowship. We won't walk through each criteria, but they are listed on our website, and you can find more details in the selection criteria webinar. So now, we are going to spend the rest of our time with questions. While we wait for a few questions to come in, Malcolm, what are some of the questions that you get asked often?
Adora, quite a few. I'll ask you maybe two or three of them, but one of the questions that I get asked frequently is, do I have to take time away from work to pursue a Bush Fellowship?
That's a good question. I actually got that question today in an inquiry call. It is not required for you to take time away to pursue a fellowship. However, it is up to each individual fellow to determine how they are going to execute their plan. So if that means that you are taking time away from work, do that. If you don't need to take time away from work, that is also an option as well. But it's really up to each individual to figure out how they are going to execute their leadership plan.
Another question I get quite frequently, Adora, is for degree seeking fellowships. Does someone already have to have been selected for their school program before they apply for a fellowship?
That's good. That's also a good question, Malcolm. No, you do not have to be selected into a school program before you start your fellowship. However, when you start the fellowship, that is when the time clock starts. And so you could have a fellowship for up to 2 years. And so if you're not admitted to school at the start of your fellowship, just know this is different from a scholarship, where it means that we will pay for 2 years of your school. We will only pay for school while you are in the fellowship program. So if you don't start school until the second year of your fellowship, then we will only pay for 1 year of school while you're in the fellowship. So remember, this is not like a scholarship that you can defer into a later point when you get into school. The clock starts when the fellowship starts.
Adora, I'll just piggyback on that by saying that, I often get the question about going to school within the region. And does a fellow have to go to school within the fellowship in the Bush Foundation region?
No, Malcolm, you don't have to go to school within the Bush Foundation region. However, you must maintain residency in the Bush Foundation region the entire time that you are a Bush Fellow. So if you decide that you want to move, you get a great opportunity in Florida and you want to move to Florida, then you can no longer be a Bush Fellow. However, if you want to go to school in Florida, feel free to go to school in Florida and return to Minnesota so that you can share your learnings within our region.
Thank you.
Malcolm, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Can I start a nonprofit or write a book during my fellowship?
You can do a lot of different things, but those two are two things that you cannot do throughout the fellowship. It's not about someone else or doing something else in the region. And by that, I mean, I would think of the fellowship as almost Project Me. So what is it that I need personally in my toolkit to grow as a leader, to enhance my effectiveness as a leader? So, that's a phrase that I like to use quite a bit. Think about it as Project Me. Think about that growth and development of yourself, not necessarily starting a nonprofit or contributing to writing a book or something of that nature.
Now, what if I'm thinking about doing some policy or lobbying work? Can the fellowship funds go toward that?
Again, Adora, no, not toward lobbying or policy work. We understand that there's a fine line between some of the work that you might be doing and some of the things that you might be learning, but specifically to use fellowship funds to fund lobbying campaigns or policy initiatives of those sorts of things, that's not allowed with the use of the Bush Fellowship dollars. I'm not sure if there's something you'd like to add to that, Adora, but the short answer is no.
No, I think you've captured it correctly. If there are skills that you want to learn that will help you learn about the policy process, then those skills you can learn, but you cannot use it toward actually advocating for a policy or a lobby.
Adora, just one other question. Can I use uh, the fellowship? Well, let me ask this then. If I've already submitted my application, can I then change my application or make changes to the application?
Unfortunately, once you've submitted your application, that is the application that we will review, and you are unable to make any changes to the application. If you decide to get fancy and submit two applications because you're like, the first one wasn't right, I'm going to submit another one, we are still going to only review the first application that comes in. If you submit a second application, it will be deleted and we will not review.
Okay.
Thank you for that question, Malcolm. I have something for you. How research
Okay.
focused can our application be? Can our goals for the fellowship be mostly research focused?
I think that's a good question. I haven't come across a lot of research plans in terms of fellowships. But again, I would go back to my answer earlier about thinking about yourself and thinking about your own growth. I mean, thinking about research. I mean, I think that's very important. However, if you can make that connection between how that particular research is going to enhance your effectiveness as a leader, then I think some of that probably can be intertwined in there. But specifically about research, again, I would come back to thinking about Project Me. How am I benefiting from this? How am I growing as a leader from this?
Thank you, Malcolm.
You're welcome. Um, Adora, I have a question. Is preference given to leaders who are seasoned, or could I apply with less than 10 years of experience?
So the requirement for the fellowship is for you to be 24 years old. And so we are just looking for leaders who have impact, a record of impact of leadership. And so if you are able to describe what your track record of leadership has been, then you're the leader that we're looking for. There isn't a preference that's giving to people who have more experience, who are more seasoned, but really who are able to speak to the criteria in the best way and really have a plan for how they are going to grow their leadership.
Great answer.
I was going to say, is there anything you want to add to that?
I don't think so. I think you nailed it.
Okay. So this question came in and said that they applied last year and they are not applying with the same application, but the topic is really related to what they did last year. How much will their previous application affect considerations for this year?
I think every year, I've been on the selection committee. I've been a reader of applications and obviously a fellow as well. I think every year that applications come in, that's a new start. I mean, you're not going back looking at old applications, seeing what someone said a year ago, or somehow basing this year's selection on last year's application. So, the only thing about that question that I would caution is again thinking about yourself and thinking about your own personal growth, just continually focusing on that. And the second thing that I would add is there is a reflection guide on the Bush website, a reflection guide to help you think through some of those things in terms of, what should I be putting in an application and how should I be developing that application?
Thanks, Malcolm. Do you have a question or do you want me to jump in?
Please jump in.
All right. So what if a person does not have all three of the selection qualities? You have to have all three to be selected as a fellow?
Yeah, let's handle this one together. Again, I probably answered some of that with my previous answer of really looking at that reflection guide. I think what the reflection guide helps a potential applicant do is to really start to uncover some of that. So, what does my leadership journey look like? What has it been like? And then really facing yourself in the mirror, so to speak, and answering the question of, you know, what gaps are there in my leadership development today that I could really benefit from a Bush Fellowship? So I think if you look hard at that reflection guide, I think it would help you uncover some of those things that one might think that they're missing today. I think those things exist in most of our backgrounds already. I don't know if there's something you'd like to add to that, Adora.
Yeah, I mean, simply, I would say yes. So we are looking for you to have all of the criteria points. Not one criteria is weighted more than the other. We are looking for someone who fits all three of the criteria points, and that is what we're looking for through each stage of the application process. So if you feel like you're in a space now where you have a track record, you have a vision for community, but maybe you don't have a plan, this might not be the best time to apply. Maybe you take this time to think about the plan, to use that reflection guide that Malcolm was referencing to start developing the plan so that you can come back with a strong plan in your next application. So again, we are looking for all three criteria points. If one is missing, spend some time to reflect on that area so that you are applying with your best chance possible when it is your time to apply.
Great answer, Dora. Um, Questions are coming in concerning how fellowship funds can be used, the flexibility of the money, travel, um, those sorts of things. And then, just how could someone use the $150,000 and what could they use it on? If you could maybe give some examples of that.
Yeah, I mean, and I will add that our website is an amazing resource and actually has some examples of what it can be used for. And our webinars also have some things that what it can be used for and what it cannot be used for. But a few of those examples can be traditional learning. So as we talked about before, a degree seeking program. You can also attend conferences, you can get certifications, attend classes. All of those things, all those traditional ways of learning are ways that the fellowship can be used. But there are also the untraditional ways of learning as well, which mean that you need to travel, to go to different places, talk to different people, to learn from different organizations. Those are also included as a part of the fellowship as well. So that's the unique aspect about the fellowship is that it is self-designed. You get to decide what is the best way to use the fellowship funds for you, and your learning may look different from someone else's learning. And so, what do you need not only to go and travel or go to school and go to those programs? What else do you need in order to get to those programs and make those happen for you? I think we've seen some questions too about can it take on some of your living expenses? And yes, it can take on some of your living expenses. But one of the expectations of that is that you are taking less from your employment. So you cannot give yourself a raise with the fellowship funds. You can't say, I'm going to work full time and I'm going to supplement my income an additional $20,000. That is not an eligible expense. You would have to say, I'm losing $20,000 from my employer to do this fellowship. And so that is something that you could replace. And then along the lines of that, when we talk about how the money is dispersed, it is not necessarily a reimbursement model, but payments are given out every quarter based on fellows submitting a reflection quarterly. Is there anything you want to add about to that?
No, but I think I saw a question that comes in that kind of reminds me of some of this of thinking about large scale change and the plan. So, Adora, I'll just throw this one at you as well. So, what does large scale, equitable, transformational change look like for Bush Fellowship Plan?
Yeah, I mean, one, it looks different for everyone, right? Like we support a region of three different states with 23 Native nations within that geography. And so transformative change is something that is big, something that cannot be done without multiple leadership, multiple people in community who are really trying to move something forward. This is really some of the systems change kind of work that you are trying to think about, something that could be not only in your neighborhood, but something that could be felt beyond your neighborhood, like something that can be scaled to something big. And when you think about the fellowship, We're always looking for big change, big ideas, but also a really big plan. And so if you are creating a plan where you say, I need to go to this one conference in Chicago, and this is going to transform my leadership. One conference could be transformational, but is that a Bush Fellowship? It may not be a Bush Fellowship. So think about all the big things that you need to do in order to transform your own leadership so that you can create change. It may be the field you're working in today, but also whatever you may do tomorrow, you'll be equipped to do it as well. It feels like you have some ideas, Malcolm.
No, I'm just thinking about my own fellowship experience when you're saying the big plan and thinking about it. Nothing to add at this time. I think something will come up a little bit later that I'll get to chime in about some of those things though.
Well, now that you've mentioned it, when you're thinking about your own fellowship experience, do you mind sharing with us your fellowship experience?
No, I think initially my plan included really needing to first of all, my fellowship was around started off thinking about service organizations in communities like Optimus, Rotary, Kiwanis, Cosmopolitan, those sorts of service organizations. And I had this big idea that we should bring all of those organizations together to even create larger community impact and change in our community by having them get out of their silos and to work together to do some of these things. At the core of the fellowship plan for me, though, was this need to go away and to really learn from some of the best people around the country and around the world of how do you convene people? How do you bring people together to then impact change where you're not stepping on their toes in terms of the individual works they're doing, but how do you create that collectively? And that's what I started to do. And then shortly after that, realized that I was thinking too small about the fellowship. It wasn't just in service organizations, but it was across political parties and religious organizations and all sorts of organizations. And since that time, I've done that work in all of those spaces. Just this morning, I had a meeting to think about how do we bring groups together here in Rapid City to have greater impact on our community. And it still starts off with some of the things that I learned that aided my leadership about how do you convene people in respectful, honest conversation. So that's what I was just thinking about my own fellowship, Dora.
Thank you for sharing. I know people are wondering. There have been people who have asked questions of how it has been transformative to their leadership, and so I'm glad you're here to be able to share part of that story with us.
Thank you. I have a question, Dora. How does the selection committee weigh academic experience compared to community-based impact?
Yeah, so I would say that, we're not weighing one higher than the other. So this is not a program for people who have a specific title. When we name leadership, we are not saying we're looking for leaders who are CEOs, who have been in C-suite level leadership. It's the same with academic degrees as well. We are not saying if you have a PhD, this program is for you because it may be and it may not be. You may need to look at how you want to grow your leadership, and it may not be through an academic setting. It may be through an untraditional setting that is really going to be powerful and impactful for you. So we're not weighting one over the other, but you are also not at a disadvantage because you don't have a degree. We are really wanting to know how have you led in your community? How are you looking at yourself as a growth opportunity, but also how does that relate to the vision that you have for your community? Not necessarily a title or a degree that already exists. And I would add sometimes it means that people say, like, my community leader did not get the Bush Fellowship. And so if they didn't get the Bush Fellowship, then that means I couldn't get it. But the focus of your
Hmm.
community leader may not have been to develop themselves as a leader. Sometimes what we get caught up is in the Bush Fellowship, people may think it's a prize for what you've been able to do in the past. And we want to uplift the things that you have done in the past. And that's why we're asking for your track record for your leadership. But we also want to know is what is happening in your future? What do you see yourself doing in the next 5, 10, 20 years? How do you want to continue to grow? And if that is not the focus of where you are, then this is not a great time for the fellowship.
Well said.
Thanks, Malcolm. So we're getting a lot of questions about learning opportunities in Minnesota, across the US. And so, you have to know exactly what you want to do in your fellowship plan when you apply.
Um, I would say the more specific you can be in thinking about your plan, I think the better it bodes for you in the application process. To have a plan to say, I want to go to a conference and I want to learn something new. That probably won't cut it. But to be as specific as you can, and that's why I keep harping on this reflection guide. As I've gone through the reflection guide with so many folks across our region, I just continually to think how important that is, that I'm looking in the mirror, that I'm looking at myself and I'm looking at my leadership journey to really determine what gaps are in there for me today in terms of growing my own leadership. And then thinking about specifically, so how do I fill those gaps? How do I fill that new knowledge, that new relationship building, those new connections that I might need, those new experiences that I might need as a leader? So then going deep into that to say, what is it that Malcolm might need to enhance that? And then formulating a plan around those gaps and those new experiences and learnings that I would need to enhance my leadership. So um, be as specific as possible as you can be, understanding that sometimes things change and your plan could change somewhat. But the more specificity you could use, I think the better.
So with that, so with the limited word count, is it better to focus on talking about the plan or about why behind your leadership?
And I could probably use some help with this one, Adora, but I think there's a combination of it. One of the saving graces that is that everyone has the same word count. Everyone has the same limitations in terms of word count, but really thinking about not only your own leadership journey, what experiences and learnings that I might need, but then how does that aid me in my own growth and development? So I think that's a real thinking process prior to putting it down on paper of thinking about that. I would say that it's a combination. You'll have a question in there about the plan. There'll be a question in there about a large scale equitable change. I think you try to apply what's asked at that question with that particular answer, but be as specific as possible.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I agree. We want you to be as specific as possible. One thing that we don't do within our review process and go and look up what you meant. And so when you think about your application process, think about somebody who is reading the application who may not know you, who may not know your work, who may not even be familiar with what is happening within your area of the state. And so sometimes people feel like they're at a benefit because they're using acronyms. But if you use ACT as an acronym, I can bet that there's probably 1,000 different things that ACT can be used for. And I'm not going to try to figure out which one of the ACT you mean in your application. So I would say be as detailed as possible, but also, you have, as Malcolm said, everyone has the same word count. And so be as succinct as possible. So details, but also straightforward. We know that you can't tell it all in this application. There's only 6 questions, and so we are looking for people who are able to just share their story in the best way, in the most details, in the most succinct way. But again, please write your application in a way that anyone who reads it is able to understand who you are, what your work is, and what your story is.
I have a question for you, Adora, in a new way that we haven't talked about. So, references. Is it important that references are from the region or are known as experts or leaders in their field? Or what would you recommend to someone about the references that they choose to include in their application?
Yeah, so we recommend that your references are people that know you well, who could speak to your leadership. I think we ask for a reference that is someone that you've led and someone that has led you. And it doesn't necessarily have to be at your job, but it could be in whatever work that you're doing, whatever way in which you're leading. But we want it to be someone who knows you well and he could speak to your leadership. And this person is not a family member. We say we don't want it to be a family member to you, but someone out in your community who could speak to your leadership really well. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No,
Okay, I don't know. Your face was saying maybe, so I don't know.
I don't think so.
Okay. How much is how and we've talked about this before, but maybe we should reiterate this. So how much is age a factor in the decision-making process?
Um, I've been in that room where, final selection, I've been a reader of earlier applications. I don't think that I've ever looked at someone's age as a benefit or as some sort of detriment to their application. I'm reading the application for the content of answering the questions and how their individual leadership would grow. I don't think that I know that I see part of the question, is there something out there that folks over 50 can't apply or something? And I would just from a personal experience, I was over 50 when I received my fellowship. So I don't think that that's a real thing. If you are still curious, if you have a proven track record, if you see that there's some gaps in your leadership game that you want to enhance or make more effective, and you can meet that moment of being prepared to take the time and put the time into doing a fellowship, I say, regardless of age, apply. There's no ceiling on the age. However, there is that requirement that you have to be at least 24 years of age at the time you make the application. So on the front end, there's some requirements about age, but I've never heard anyone within the Bush Foundation or any of the circles that I've been in those rooms where we're making those decisions where someone has talked about age being a negative.
No, thank you, Malcolm. And I think sometimes what we often see is like we just look at a picture of someone and we make a determination about what we think their age may be, which may be inaccurate. And so I think our average Bush Fellow is around the age of 45, 47 years old. But then we also have fellows that are 29. We also have fellows who are in their 60s. And so, it's a breadth of ages that are considered for the fellowship. I will just also add is that as we talked about before, it's not about what you've done. So if you are someone who is a seasoned leader who says like, this is my time to be a Bush Fellow because I've done all the things and I need time to sit back and
Mm-hmm.
relax. This fellowship is not about sitting back and relaxing.
Right.
This is not a sabbatical program. In fact, we support a sabbatical program at Nexus Community Partners. This is really about building your capacity and your knowledge to lead. And so, what ways do you want to build your leadership, even at 70 plus, right? Because that doesn't mean that your career is over because you're 70 plus. It may mean that you're not working in your current job, but your community work may not have ended. And so, how are you thinking about continuing to grow and bring people alongside you in the journey? Like, how are you going to share your knowledge and your capacity with others so that they are in a better position in the future as well?
Great answer. Adora, what qualities most distinguish successful applicants from strong but unsuccessful ones?
So you may have seen that last year we received about 1,000 applications. And that is probably because there are many amazing leaders within our region. And those who are really successful in the application process have really been able to draw a through line between who they are as a leader and all of the criteria points that we've talked about. Even if you do that well, it still may mean that there's someone who is even rising to the top. And so I don't want you to think because you didn't become a Bush Fellow or maybe you didn't become a semifinalist that it doesn't mean that you didn't write a good application because the application can still be great, but there may have been others that have risen to the top. And I think that is one thing that we talk about when we think about if you've applied in the past. If you were a semifinalist in the past or you were a finalist in the past, and you were like, I've already been at this step, so I'm just going to submit the same application. Well, new people are applying, and so people are applying with different applications, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a finalist again just because you were one last year. So really think about how you are reading your story, writing your story, and how that really aligns with the criteria, and asking people around you, do they understand what you're saying? Is there something that you are missing in your application that would make you rise to the top and make you more compelling? Like how are you uniquely positioned in this point right now? Do the fellowship. because reviewers may say they could be a great fellow, but it may not be right now. Like there are other things that they need to do until they are ready for a fellowship. So think about all the ways that you could share that you are ready, and this is the right time for you to be a fellow.
Adora, a question concerning specifically Chat GPT, but I think overall looking at can applicants use AI in aiding their applications?
So, this is a great question. As a person who is very new to AI, I want to name that throughout our application and selection process, each application is read by a real person. So, from our end, we do not use AI to review applications. Each is read by a real person. If you would like to use ChatGPT or any other AI resource, that's fine. Just make sure that it really shares your story in a way that is reflective of you. Sometimes we may see readers come back and say like maybe they used AI because it feels a little flat. Like I don't feel like this is a person who has emotions and is really deeply embedded in these words. So I would say take some time to review whatever you are submitting to AI as part of your application process. But it is also not a writing contest. So as we're reviewing applications, we are not looking to say who has the most well-written application. We are looking for who is really connected to the criteria. And that may not mean that you're the best writer, but we may be able to understand and see the story that you are bringing forth.
Adora, I'd just like to add something to that. One of the things that I've really appreciated about the Bush Foundation's approach to the applications and then the fellowship program overall is that, once fellows are named, those are in the past 24, now 30 individual journeys that those fellows are on. It's not a cohort program. And I just say that to say the individuality of that person's leadership journey and what they need right now at this particular time in that future journey as well is so unique and is so different than someone else. I think if people really lean into the reflection guide, I think it helps you start to think about the imagination about what it is that I need, what it is that I want at this particular time, which is so unique and so different than what I might want. So I would just say take the time, lean into really thinking about who you are, what you need at this stage, and then write that application from that point. Not to say that some folks might be using Chat GPT or other AI tools, but gosh, those unique journeys really come. I think they stand out when people can write about themselves in that fashion.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Malcolm.
Sure.
So can you speak to the level of assistance or support or facilitation that the Bush Fellowship provides or the Bush Foundation provides in helping execute fellows' plans?
Well, I'm going to take it first. I'm going to say the application itself. I think, once you're not going to get help from staff inside the foundation once you're creating your application and submitting your application. But to Dora's earlier point of having others that know you read your application prior, I think that that's really important. So, the Bush Foundation has provided support in terms of going around the region, having conversations with folks, sharing the reflection guide, doing live Q&As, doing webinars. So, I mean, think leading up to the application, there's been a ton of support, call in, inquiry calls, all of those sorts of things. I think once you're selected as a Bush Fellow, um, I think the staff then or Adora and her team bends over backwards to help you think through at different points when your plan might need some work. I'll give just a quick example that you submit a plan, and then that plan is reviewed by someone who has some knowledge of what successful plans could look like. And then some recommendations are made back to the Bush Fellow at that point to say, here's some areas that you could continue to think about, or you maybe dive a little bit deeper into, or think larger about. So I think that there's tons of support along the way, both before application and then after fellowship as well. I don't know if there's something you want to add to that, Adora.
I mean, I think that was a great response, honestly. I think another piece to add to that is that we don't facilitate any programming as a fellowship, and we're not necessarily saying we're not making connections for you often. If there are connections that you want to make, sometimes we're able to help facilitate those connections, but it's really an individual journey, and so you have to be ready with your plan and the ways in which you want to execute that plan, and not depend on the foundation to help you execute the plan.
There's another question here. I think we just answered it, but maybe it just bears saying, leaning into a little bit more. Is the fellowship treated like a cohort or an individual fellowship?
Yeah, the fellowship is not a cohort style. So, as I mentioned in my previous response, we do not provide programming for the fellowship. It is really a self-designed individual journey. There are times in which we bring fellows that are active together to be able to have conversation that again is guided by the individual fellows. We're not guiding any conversation because everyone's journey looks different, but it is an individual journey. So if you really appreciate a cohort style program where you're having a similar experience, this might not be the fellowship for you. But if you're really someone who is motivated, who can make connections, who wants to get the best use out of whatever opportunities are available to you, then the Bush Fellowship is for you.
I'll just lean in with one other question, Dora. How do you engage with past fellows and connect them to current or future fellows?
Yeah. So as a foundation, we engage with past fellows. In fact, past fellows are the people who are our first reviewers in the application process. So that is, as you are going through this process, it's not that this is something that is just happening inside of the Bush Foundation, but fellows and other leaders are a part of this process as well. Sometimes when I'm across the region, we get fellows together just to connect. We have a monthly call for all of our active fellows, again, who can have a conversation, but the conversation is guided by the fellows. We may be in the space, but we don't use the space to say, here's a topic you should talk about. We say, who's bringing in something today that they want to connect about? And those are how connections are made. And it is our expectation, too, that as you are wanting to connect with fellows, that you will go out and find the fellows that you want to connect with. And even in this process, if you are just applying and you are looking at our website has all of our Bush Fellows listed in a grants database. And so if you are looking for fellows that are in your area, who live in your state, who are doing similar work, they're listed on our website and you can find them. Maybe it means you have to reach out to them on LinkedIn, but we don't necessarily facilitate those connections for you, because we also want to keep our fellows' information confidential as well. And so if you want to reach out to a fellow on LinkedIn, we encourage you to do so.
And just to add to that, just my experience, I received a fellowship a decade ago. I am still leaning into and reaching out and connecting with fellows across the state of South Dakota in particular, but across the region. When I come to the Twin Cities or I come to Minnesota, I'm reaching out to fellows that I went through some sort of fellowship experience with, or other fellows that I've met throughout the years. And every now and again, probably once or at least twice a year here, I will convene small groups of fellows. I just was with a fellow who received their fellowship in the 80s. So, I go back a long way to just connect with fellows. And I take that as my responsibility, not the Bush Foundation. I'm a leader in my community. I reach out to these folks as well across the years. A dear friend of mine who recently passed away was a Bush fellow in the 1960s. We found out that we had fellowship in common. That created a tighter bond, and he helped mentor me through my fellowship a little bit. And then we became wonderful friends as a result of that connection with the fellowship. So I thought it was my responsibility to do some of that connection as well.
Thank you, Malcolm. Here's a question. Are there outcomes that the Bush Foundation is looking to achieve to be mindful when communicating their impact or big vision for their project Me in their Bush Fellowship application?
I will probably answer this from a Malcolm perspective. So please, Adora, after I finish, please Bushify it. Make it sound like the Bush Foundation. Um, yes and no. I think that, you know, again, looking at the criteria and looking at folks who have a proven track record, I think the Bush Foundation, there's a certain trust to grant making. And, once you receive a grant from the Bush Foundation, there's a certain understanding that, you're going to continue to be who you are in terms of having a successful track record and making things happen in your community. And now with the fellowship, just thinking about how do I enhance my own experiences and leadership to even be able to do more of that. So that kind of, you've got to prove yourself, I think has been done somewhat already. However, there are learning logs that you would contribute. There are writings that you do on a monthly basis that are more about, what am I experiencing? What am I doing so that other folks who are going through this experience of fellowship at the same time that you're going through, that they can read and comment and you're reading theirs as well. But is there some, um, I've got to justify and write something at the end of this to say, why I received this or how, I didn't find that sort of pressure on me to be able to do that. But communicate throughout the process of being a Bush Fellow.
Yeah, what I would add to that is that the Bush Foundation is issue agnostic, which means that we are not looking for a specific issue focus throughout the application process, nor are we looking for a specific type of learning opportunity that we favor over another. And so we are really looking to know, will this get you to where you want to be as an individual? And that looks different for everyone. And we're able to see that through the review of the application. So, for example, if you're like talking about your work in education and how you want to grow different educational systems within your community, but then you get to your plan and you're like, actually, I want to do this wealth building work. We're trying to figure out how do we get from wealth building to education? Like, how is this wealth building opportunity going to support you in the educational system work that you are trying to transform? And so, if you're not able to explain that, then we're not able to draw the through line ourselves for you. So we're really looking to understand, how are you going to be better for your community in the ways that you are looking to grow and shift and change your community, and does that align with the activities that you have chosen in your plan? So some things may feel like this would be a fun opportunity to go to because I have a Bush Fellowship. But if this doesn't align with what you're trying to do, then that we might not see that alignment either. Do you have a question, Malcolm, or you want me to jump
Uh,
in?
I can ask one.
Go ahead.
Is it possible to use Bush Fellowship funding to support Minnesotans in helping communities outside of Minnesota or even outside of the United States? In other words, can the funding be applied to international work?
That's a good question. And I actually just had a conversation today about that as well. So part of our criteria is that you want to make this region of the Bush Foundation better for everyone within this region, and that you have a commitment to this region. And again, that region is Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and the 23 Native nations that share the same geography. Although we understand that the work that you may do may have some global impact, if your application is centered on global impact versus something that is within our region, that may not be a great fit for the fellowship. It may be an opportunity to look at something different, but we are really looking to learn how you want to grow and develop this region and be a better leader for the people here. Understanding that being a better leader for the people here may also have global impacts, but it's not the start, it may be the finish.
Hmm.
So, Malcolm, can you get feedback on the draft of your application by scheduling an inquiry call?
Um, I would say no. Um, the inquiry calls are to learn more about the application process, those sorts of things. But that grant making officer or a DORA grant making director that you might talk to on your inquiry call is not going to say, send me your draft of your application in advance so that we can go over it and I can help you enhance it. That's not going to be the role of a staff member of the Bush Foundation. I think Adora said it a couple of times, and I would just recommend if you're looking for feedback on your application, think about people that know you in your community or around the region where you might have relationships, or seek out a former Bush fellow to be able to help read that application. And if they are up for providing some sort of feedback. But again, before I turned in any application, I would have some others read it for feedback just to see that it makes sense. And I would lead with at least explaining to them that this is not about an organization, but this is about my growth and development. So at least they have that understanding why you might be talking about all of these things that go into supporting your growth and development. But no, you're not going to schedule an inquiry call to have a staff member go over feedback with you about your application.
Thank you, Malcolm. I will also add too, if you have questions, like today, we only can get to so many questions. We had another live Q&A. We can only get to so many questions in that one as well. So if you have questions that are really about your specific, uh, plan, if there's something specific to you, those might be questions that will be great for a one-on-one 20-minute inquiry call. And we will be doing those calls all the way up until the close of the application. And so if today you feel like your questions haven't been answered and you have some more really specific individual questions, then you should go to our website and set up a call. And we'll share more information about those calls at the end of the session. Malcolm, I
Adora,
think we have time for maybe one or two more questions.
just one. I have one here that I think is universal. Is the fellowship income taxed, or is that money taxed, or what would you recommend for someone as they look at their if they receive a fellowship and then taxation of that income or that
Yes.
monies?
This is a good question. We get this question all the time. And unfortunately, it looks different for everyone. So it could be considered as income for you. And we also do not give tax advice at the Bush Foundation. What we do is encourage you to seek a tax professional if you receive a Bush Fellowship, to ask them about how it applies to your own individual tax journey and your income. So this may not be the this may not be the answer that you wanted to receive, but know that it does look different for everyone. And this is not considered like a job. So you will not receive a W-2 for being a Bush Fellow. However, you are receiving money through a fellowship, and whatever ways you need to document that for the IRS is based on your own individual situation. Thank you for that question, Malcolm. It's a tough one, but it's necessary.
I think it's definitely the right answer. I mean, talk to your own tax professional, your accounting professionals about it. Yep.
So someone has
Are
said
there
that
time for any more questions? Or oh,
I'll do one more. So someone asked that they've applied multiple times and they've asked former fellows for feedback and they've come back more confused than ever. And so they feel like they gave them some answers that were really different. And so should they just do it alone and follow their gut?
I would still say, maybe not going to as many Bush fellows then in the, because maybe, some of the pieces have changed since, you're talking to a fellow who might have gone through a few years ago. But I would look at that criteria and I would have someone in my community read my application. And maybe not a Bush fellow, which is someone with new eyes, with fresh eyes on it. But at least I would lay out that criteria. Here's the criteria and here are the questions. And then this is how I answer the questions. Does my application tend to make sense? In that regard, is it readable? Does it flow? Can you understand the experiences and the learnings that I want to have or experience as a result of a Bush Fellowship? But I wouldn't just go it alone.
I will also add that the Bush Fellowship has changed over time. And so the core of the fellowship has remained the same, their experience, someone else's experience. they may be totally different. So I think if you really have an understanding for where you want to go, go with your gut in that, but also know that all the resources that we provided as a foundation are also helpful in the journey to applying. Bush Fellows are an amazing resource, but they're not the only resource. We're recommending for you to look at the resources that are in your community, the leaders that know you the most deeply, and we have provided the criteria, the questions, even a month before the application was open. Those have been on our website. We have the webinars, we have the calls, and so if there are questions that are coming up for you, you have access to the Bush Foundation and our staff to answer those questions. Of course, as we mentioned before, we're not going to review your application and give you feedback on that application. Because if we did and you didn't get it, you say, I talked to Adora, she's the director. How come I didn't get it? Because it may be good, but there may have been someone else that has risen to the top. But we want you to utilize all the resources that are available to you, especially those that are provided by the Bush Foundation. So with that, Jen, if you could put our slides back up, I'll turn it over to Malcolm to give us some exiting information.
Sure. First of all, I'll just say thank you for everyone who's engaged in this process and who came to learn more about the application process today. I would also just add at the end here, and I'm going to repeat it and I'm going to read it word for word because I want to make sure that it's clear. Application and selection criteria can be found on the Bush Foundation website now. Applications close on Tuesday, October 7th, 2025 at noon Central Time. I'll say that part again. Applications close on Tuesday, October 7th, 2025 at noon Central Time. We encourage you to submit your application before the deadline. We will not make exceptions for applications that are not submitted by the deadline. And I just reiterate, applications close on October 7th, 2025 at noon Central Time, not 12:05 or 12:10 or at noon Central Time. So get the application in prior to that.
Thank you, Malcolm. And when you say noon Central Time, that means that if you should be submitting your application before noon Central Time, and that is noon Central on the Bush Foundation clock. So if your clock says that it's noon Central and on the Bush Foundation clock it says it's 12:10, it is 12:10 to us. So make sure that you get your application in by noon Central Time. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us through our contact hub. The email address is there, our phone number is there, and you can also set up a call with our staff through the link that is on our website. Again, we do not review applications prior to submission. And with that, I hope this session has been beneficial as you begin your application journey. We look forward to reading your application. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us today. Have a great day.
Bye all.